Welcome to 2H TV. Today we are going to treat a first topic, and today's topic is Introduction to Waves, where we will be looking at the definition of waves. We will be looking at the classification of waves based on medium of propagation and direction of travel. So under medium of propagation, we will be talking about mechanical waves. Then we talk about electromagnetic waves. Right from there, we'll talk about the differences between electromagnetic and mechanical waves. Then we look at the direction of travel. That one too, and direct. We'll be talking about transverse waves. We'll be talking about longitudinal waves. Then we look at the differences between these two waves. That's transverse waves and longitudinal waves. Then we look at the general representation of waves, where and direct will be defining some terms in waves. Then we do some calculations. So basically, this is what we are going to do for today's class. So let's dive right into action. Now, so let's define wave. What is wave? So when we talk about wave is simply a disturbances, any disturbance at all, which travels through a medium, transferring energy from one point to another, without permanently displacing the medium. Now we have to note that wave carries energy, but they don't transfer matter. That is a point you have to know. If waves are to carry matter, meaning that at a point of time, the medium through which they travel could get finished. So take note of that. Now let's look at the classification of waves. So for classification of waves, we are going to talk on medium of propagation. So if the medium of propagation, we have mechanical wave and electromagnetic wave. So let's look at the definition for mechanical waves. Now when we talk about mechanical wave, they are simply waves that require material medium for their propagation. So this type of waves cannot travel through space. They can't travel through a vacuum. They require a material medium to travel through. And some examples under this type of waves are, we have water wave, we have wave on a rope, we have sound wave, and many others. Now let's look at electromagnetic waves. Now electromagnetic wave, this type of waves also does not require material medium for their propagation. So this type of waves are able to travel through space. They are able to travel through vacuum. They are not able to travel through a medium. So we have some examples under it, such as we have radio waves, we have S-rays, we have gamma rays, waves, and electromagnetic wave is that. For mechanical wave, they require material medium for their propagation, whilst electromagnetic waves, they do not require material medium for their propagation. That is the first difference between mechanical and electromagnetic wave. Now the second difference is that mechanical wave can be transverse or longitudinal, whilst electromagnetic waves can be transverse only. Now mechanical wave travels at a low frequency, whilst electromagnetic wave travels at a high frequency. So basically, these are the three differences between mechanical wave and electromagnetic wave. Now so let's look at the direction of travels. So for the direction of travel, we talk about transverse waves and longitudinal wave. What then is transverse waves? Now transverse wave is a wave that travels in a direction that is perpendicular to the direction of vibration. So meaning that if the wave is traveling in a horizontal direction, the medium of propagation will also travel in a vertical direction. So they will create an angle of 90. So they create an angle which is perpendicular to each other. So you should note that transverse waves are perpendicular to each other. Now let's look at longitudinal waves. So this type of waves travels in a direction that is parallel to the direction of the vibration causing the wave. So this means that if the medium of propagation is traveling in a horizontal direction, the medium of vibration or means of vibration also travels in the same horizontal direction. So they are perpendicular to each other. They do not intersect at any point. So you should take note of that. Now, what are the differences between transverse waves and longitudinal waves? So this is how a transverse waves look like. And this is how electromagnetic waves look like. So something like this. Not drawn to scale actually. So here is what we call crest. Then we call here troughs. So the distance between two successive crests. The distance between two successive crests is what we call wavelength. So the distance between two successive crests is what we call wavelength for what? A transverse waves. So for longitudinal waves, the distance between two successive compression or refraction is what we call wavelength. So this is a refraction. This is another refraction. So the distance between these two is what we call wavelength. Sorry, this is compression rather. This is compression. So the refraction is more or less like the wider space. So the distance between two wider space is also a wavelength. Now, so let's look at the differences between transverse waves and longitudinal waves. So transverse waves, they have what we call crests and troughs. But when you come to longitudinal waves, they have what we call compression and refraction. The second difference is the distance between two successive crests or two successive troughs is what we call wavelength. And for longitudinal waves, the distance between two successive compression or two successive refraction is what we call wavelength. So basically, these are the two differences between transverse waves and longitudinal waves. So let's look at the general representation of waves. Let's quickly look at that. So this is a diagram to depict a wave. Quickly, we have the origin. We have our time here. So we have amplitude, crest, that crest, and from this to this place is what we call the wavelength. So let's look at the general representation of a wave. So we'll be talking about some terms used in describing a wave. Now, the first thing we are going to look at is amplitude. So amplitude is simply the vertical displacement of a wave. So this is a horizontal direction of a wave. So the vertical maximum displacement of a wave is what we call amplitude. So amplitude is simply the vertical maximum displacement of a wave is amplitude, and it is represented by a symbol A. Now let's look at period, which is represented by a symbol T. So period 2 is the time. So it is the time taken to complete one oscillation. So period is simply the time taken to complete one oscillation. Then let's look at frequency, which is represented by small f. Frequency also is simply the number of cycles complete within a time of 1 second, and it is measured in hertz. The SI unit is hertz or per second. Period is measured in seconds. Sorry for that. Period is measured in seconds. Amplitude is also measured in meters. Now let's look at wavelength. Wavelength. And this is the symbol for wavelength, lambda. And wavelength also is simply the distance between two successive crests, or in longitudinal waves, the distance between two successive refraction or compression. And it is also measured in meters. Then we'll talk about amplitude, we talk about period, we talk about frequency. So let's look at velocity, which is denoted by v, small v. So velocity also is displacement over time. So it can be displacement over time, or it can be distance per unit time. Distance traveled by a particle per unit time. So these are basically some of the terms that we'll be using in waves calculation. So take note of that. Amplitude, the maximum displacement of a vibrating particle from its rest point. The maximum vertical displacement of vibrating particle from its rest point. We said period is the time taken to complete one oscillation. So this is half a circle. This is also half a circle. And that represents a wavelength.